The Gigabyte GTX 1650 WindForce is one of the middle-priced cards costing around 9,300 Philippine peso. But how does it perform? Let's check it out. The GTX 1650 is out for more than a month now, and various partner cards had already released their models around it. And today what I have here is the Gigabyte GTX 1650 WindForce. This is one of the 4 video cards that Gigabyte have for their GTX 1650 lineup. This card also has a 6-pin connector that a lot of 1650s don't have, but that does equate to a higher clocks or higher overclocking headroom. Before we check that out, let's just go over the features of this card. This card has a rated boost clock of 1785 MHz, but my card has way well boosted up until 1935 MHz. It's maybe due to the extra power that it is getting from the 6-pin connector. Memory clock, on the other hand, is clocked at 2001 MHz. It also runs on GDDR5 memory with 128-bit bus with a 128 GB per second memory bandwidth. All of this is being cooled by an aluminum heatsink paired with 2 90mm fans. This fan spins in opposite direction, which Gigabyte claims that it should have better heat dissipation as compared to the standard approach. Though I cannot test this personally, their explanation makes a lot of sense as there is less obstruction in the air movement. This card also features their 3T active fan technology, where fan won't start spinning unless it reaches a certain temperature. This is great as it will keep your system silent when you're just casually browsing or doing light loads. Though not a big deal, this card doesn't have a backplate on it, which is a little weird for me as this card is on the higher end spectrum of the 1650 of Gigabyte. Back I/O has 3 HDMI 2.0B and as well as 1 DisplayPort 1.4 for those users who wants their multi-display setup. For those who are still running DVI connection, this might be a consideration for you, but personally, I think you could just easily buy a DVI to DisplayPort connection for as low as 300 Philippine peso. Overclocking this card was fairly easy. I was able to push the core clock to an extra of 150 MHz, totaling to a 2055 MHz core clock. And as for the memory, I was able to push it an extra 920 MHz, totaling to a 2410 MHz memory clock. And all of this was done using MSI's Afterburner. For today's testing, I will be running this card on my Ryzen 3 2200G paired with my ASRock AB350M Pro 4 motherboard. And as for my memory, I will be using my G.Skill Trident Z 16GB DDR4 RAM, which is clocked at 3000 MHz. All of my tests will cover both stock and overclock result on a 1080p resolution, as well as I will also include both power consumption and temperature for this card. And with that, let us go to the benchmarks. And with our results out, we could see that overclocking this card yielded better performance without too much compromise on its power consumption. I am also curious on other GTX 1650, especially those without 6-pin power connector, and I would like to see their highest overclocking headroom. Temperature of this card on the other hand is still within the acceptable margin, but what would be surprising is the noise level of its fan. Even at 80% fan level, the card itself is still barely audible while keeping the GPU well under reasonable temperatures. Here is a quick noise test of this card. I would say that you should definitely consider this model when you're looking at GTX 1650 yourself, as the price itself is justifiable with all the features that you'll be getting with this card. And for my personal thoughts on this whole GTX 1650 release, this card is a great generational upgrade to the GTX 1050, but was severely undermined by its bad price point and considering the fact that AMD has a better option for a much cheaper price. I also did a benchmark comparison between the two on my last video, which you could check it out, and I'll post the link down below. And lastly, I think if the GTX 1650 was released $20 or 1,000 pesos cheaper, then things might be very different with what we have right now. I think that's a wrap for today's review. If you find the video useful, please consider liking it. And do subscribe to my channel for more tech reviews and benchmarks like this. Once again, this is Brain of Junkyard Summit. Thank you and see you in the next one.